Hi, everybody. Welcome to our water conversation in our spring webinar series. Oops. My name is Laura Herrera. I'm a community-based researcher and communication specialist supporting the CRC in our mission to promote interdisciplinary scholarship on the social and environmental dimensions of cannabis. Through scientific research and engagement with community, government, and academic entities, we advance understanding of cannabis in socio-ecological systems at local, national, and global scales. We seek to inform public dialogue and contribute to the development of prosperous, equitable communities and healthy environments. I'd like to take a little bit of time to do a land acknowledgement. And so I'll hand it over to Earle Crosby, who has dedicated over 20 years to working with the Karuk tribe.
Good afternoon, everybody, and other participants of the webinar. My name is Earle Crosby. I'm the Deputy Director of the Watershed Branch for the Karuk Tribe's Department of Natural Resources, and I think it's right and proper in the first step toward social justice and acknowledgement is to acknowledge that wherever we are now occupying the Aboriginal territory of a sovereign people. I think we all need to take a moment and acknowledge that in our day-to-day lives, and as we move through this place that we call home, that there's people that were here at some point, they're still here today, and they'll be here tomorrow. So let's have that acknowledgement of those sovereign people and the land that they've taken care of since time began. Thank you.
You're muted. Laura, you're muted.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thank you, Earle. So Earle is in a more remote area of Northern California, so he might be joining us just verbally. Now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Christopher Dillis, who will moderate the water conversation.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here, but I'm going to stop video so I can do that. Okay. So again, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We have a great panel for you today, a great discussion lined up. Before we get into the Q&A, I'm just going to start, we're each going to start with a brief discussion to kind of get us warmed up. So my name is Christopher Dillis. I've been a researcher at UC Berkeley for a little over a year now in the Cannabis Research Center, although I've been working with the CRC for a couple of years before that, focusing on cannabis, water use, and sort of other industry-related research. Joining me today, we have Derrick Smith from the Resource Innovation Institute, who will be sharing some exciting updates from his recently published report on water use in the cannabis industry. We also have Portugal from CDFW, who is going to be sharing some of his expertise on the regulation of cannabis and its water use. And then finally, we have Earle Crosby from the Karuk Department of Natural Resources, who has a lot of great on-the-ground experience on this topic in Northern California. So what I would like to do is, for those of you in the audience who might not have tuned into one of these webinars, or at least a water use presentation from us before, just to share a couple insights from some of the research we've done. There's a couple papers I've listed in the bottom corner that they're posted on the CRC website, along with a research brief, if you don't care to read the full versions of those papers. So the two take-home messages I would like to share are first, that in this discussion that we have about how much water does cannabis use, one of our first papers kind of set this dialogue of, well, it's about timing, and it's about when water is actually withdrawn from the environment. So we found that the storage capacity of a farm and the sources they use actually influence when they take water from the environment, which is actually more important than just putting a number on how much water cannabis uses. And then the second finding that wells are the most prominent source of irrigation water for cannabis in Northern California. And this sort of introduces this issue of groundwater surface water interaction and brings in a whole other field of geomorphology and hydrology, trying to get other researchers involved in studying how groundwater and surface water interact. However, okay, so since 2018 though, and most of this work has been focused in Northern California, and since 2018, this cannabis industry in California is developing statewide, and so this sort of necessitates a more broader research focus. And so I guess it was just a couple of weeks ago, we put out a paper on the geography of regulated cannabis in California since 2018. And this paper, by the way, is also now available on our website if you want to check that out under our publications tab. So this is one of the main summary figures, and I don't expect you to, and this is just for a preview. Don't worry about actually digesting any of this in the 20 seconds I'm going to show it to you. But this is just to say that what we've seen is, while Northern California is still home to the most farms, it's really along the Central Coast and in Lake County that we're seeing the largest expansion of cultivated acreage. And this is a result of much larger farms coming into the industry in these areas. And so what this means is there's clearly a new kind of cannabis farming in California. And so we're seeing larger farms in drier areas of the state. And part of this industrialization of cannabis results in the increasing diversity of irrigation practices throughout California. So this sort of brings more uncertainty even into the question of how much water does cannabis use. And so luckily, Derrick's going to be able to share some great info on that with us in just a minute. But I also wanted to include this note here that we still see the largest number of farms and the most overlap with sensitive watersheds in Northern California. And so for good reason, this is still where we're focusing most of our research attention. So that being said, so looking statewide though, we're still seeing this trend in larger farms and in drier climates. And we found that this increases the likelihood of well use. And so a big part of the discussion around well use has been impacts to stream flow. And so some previous research that we've been involved with has identified that, wells as far as over a kilometer from streams still have the potential to impact flow, and that these impacts can be delayed and persistent. Delayed meaning they might not show up for a number of years, and persistent meaning they may persist for a number of years after extraction from that well has ceased. But so finally, looking statewide, there's a lot of variation to the extent in which these cannabis farms and their wells are located in groundwater basins. And so this issue of cannabis farming in groundwater basins brings another question to these areas in which cannabis is a relatively new topic. And that is, again, how much water does cannabis use? And because policies are just in the early stages of being drafted and revised, this is a very important area, a very urgent need for new information on how cannabis farms are using water now, and sort of a more updated picture on water use practices, and just to get a handle on the diversity of water use practices to have a base for which we can get an estimate for how much water cannabis uses. So with that, I think that's a pretty good segue to our first panelist, Derrick Smith. So I'm going to stop sharing here and okay, so if you want to start sharing, Derrick. So Derrick is the Executive Director of Resource Innovation Institute, a nonprofit organization advancing efficiency in resource-intensive agricultural sectors to cultivate a more resilient future. RII recently partnered with Berkeley, the Berkeley Cannabis Research Center, that is, and New Frontier Data to publish Cannabis H20, Water Use and Sustainability in Cultivation. Before RII, Derrick led Clean Energy Works, recognized as one of the most successful American recovery and reinvestment ag programs. otherwise known as the stimulus programs. He has directed energy programs for the city of Portland and created an award-winning corporate sustainability program for a national retailer. Derrick has testified to the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and briefed the U.S. Secretary of Energy. Take it away, Derrick.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to say thank you to the CRC and everybody there, but Chris and Van and Ted in particular for the great partnership on this report, which we put out last month, I guess, since we're at the end of this month, in partnership with New Frontier Data, a data analytics firm in the cannabis industry. So I'm going to talk to you about, as Chris said, water usage and some efficiency techniques that we're seeing. I'm going to contrast California data with national data, and I'll explain a little bit of the variation there, but Chris has really got the best handle on specifically what's going on in California and specifically policy recommendations for you all, although I'll happily weigh in. First, I'm just going to tell you quickly about RII because it does underlie some of the reasons and the information in the report. So we've been around for about 5 years. I'm based up in Portland, Oregon. Grew up in Sacramento, actually, in Northern California. And what RII does is, as a nonprofit, is we measure, inform, and verify on various resource usage in the industry. So we establish the KPIs for the industry, help governments and utilities understand benchmarks and baselines, and ultimately inform best practices and policies and whatnot. At the end of the day, we're going to be verifying performance and providing the opportunity for leadership recognition. So we've got a lot of expertise in what we do, and we recently were awarded a USDA grant to essentially do the work that we've been doing in cannabis, but in the larger traditional ag sector, particularly focused in the controlled environment agriculture, which is, we're seeing a lot of field agriculture move into greenhouses and add electricity and just other forms of energy use as one example. And then we also see these urban farms in warehouses growing basil and lettuce and funded with a tremendous amount of capital. And so we're specifically studying those types of resource uses and comparing them to field ag. We interact with a variety of stakeholders throughout the market. Everything we do is peer reviewed and guided by our technical advisory council, which we're proud to have CRC serve on, our water group. And what we do is we engage subject matter experts into various working groups on specific topics. So for this project, we brought together a very representative group of water-related actors. And the whole objective was to everybody on this list and everybody not on this list can agree that we need more data about resource use in cannabis. And the challenge here was that there was really no good data on cannabis water usage. And in fact, there was really just a reliance on some old statistics that for the most part related to the illicit market. And there was some conflation with those numbers being applied to the regulated market. And what we've seen is that the regulated market is generally more efficient with resource use than the illicit market. And so we were out to understand, what does a regulated market look like in all these dynamic ways that it's producing nowadays? And how can we compare that to the illicit market and actually get some good, hopefully representative data? So we used RII's resource benchmarking platform called the Cannabis Power Score to capture the data. And so this is essentially a web-based survey tool that has analytics underneath it. And it's got hundreds of farms that have provided data to us on the way they're using energy, water, and the waste that they're contributing. We're also doing carbon emissions calculations. And it's also a reporting tool for producers to report to the states that are requiring energy and water reporting and local jurisdictions. So we usually take data from that platform and publish a lot of guidance, best practices guides. So we will be publishing a water recirculation best practices guide funded by USDA for the controlled environment ag sector soon, but that will apply to cannabis as well, or it can be used by the cannabis sector. And next month, we're coming out with a policy primer, which will have in-depth water policy guidance that came out of the work that we did with CRC and others in the water report. We publish other publications. But I'm here to talk to you about, again, broadly, what are we seeing in cannabis water usage nationally, and how can we compare that to what's happening in California? And then what are we seeing in terms of some efficiency techniques? So we've got a diagram over on the right here that is showing you various sources of water, and then essentially linear and circular flows of water throughout a farm or a facility. And so this is generally trying to represent, no matter the type of cultivation, indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, these are some of the stages of cultivation where water is used. And as you can see, it's used throughout the cultivation process, and there's a lot of variability from farm to farm or facility to facility in how water is used. But generally, it's represented in, the intake, the filtration, the storage, the fertigation, the watering, and then reuse. We're seeing a lot more common, but we also still see a lot of effluent and drainage. So how much water is used, and we've got some statistics here. These are from 3 different data sets that we used for the report. The one primary data set was our National Power Score database. So you can see there the indoor, outdoor, and greenhouse ranges of, annual volumes of gallons, applied per year. And then with California, you can see that the numbers are smaller. A lot of that is because these are a lot of smaller farms, but they're also in less water intensive environments, greenhouse and outdoor. And then you can also see that in Michigan, where there are larger indoor facilities, that the water use can range even close to 1 million gallons a year. These are just ranges that we saw in the farms and facilities that we evaluated for this report. You can imagine that the ranges are actually larger. There's less water usage in some tiny farms, and there's more water usage in some massive, multi-acre facilities that we see in various parts of the world. So again, takeaway, huge variability in the amount of water that's used. And that variability, or the amount of usage, is really determined by a number of factors. Indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, how they're cultivating, cultivation techniques, if they're reusing, if they're automating, controlling. That gets into some of the technologies that we're seeing that are helpful. Some of the lighting equipment provides a lot of heat in the room and requires or results in a lot of dehumidification and transpiration from the plants and dehumidification, electricity usage as an example. So there's a lot of interactive effects going on, a lot of things that it's really hard to say there's one number that is descriptive of the amount of water that is used in these farms or facilities. So what we want to encourage you all to think about is the way to understand water usage, the way to measure it. And we want to really strongly encourage everybody to move away from a gallons per plant understanding. And that is because there are so many different ways that cultivators grow, from 100, gallon pots in hot climates outdoor to, a sea of green methodology indoors, where they're cramming plants together as tightly as possible to get the value out of the real estate. And so we want to be thinking about gallons per flowering canopy, square footage. We want to be thinking about productivity. How many grams are being produced per gallons applied or consumed? Again, this is more like an industrial process than an office building. You need to be thinking about it as on a unitized basis as well, and then a demand perspective as well. So when you think about, go extrapolate from a farm or facility level and really look at the numbers in the aggregate. In California, while it is a major cannabis cultivation center of the world, As it relates to California agricultural water usage in the aggregate, cannabis is just not a major contributor to California water challenges. And so we hope that's a takeaway. This is not to say that there is not a lot of water efficiency that can be done in these farms and facilities. There are. Very peer-reviewed, clear takeaway that all the stakeholders who were involved in this said is there is overwatering happening generally at a rate of at least 10%. And so there are a lot of efficiency techniques that can still be applied, a lot of training to support cultivators, and just a lot of best practices still to emerge. With that, I hope that was a useful, just kind of, again, macro overview of the issues around cannabis and water. And I'm really excited to be part of this panel and to turn it over to, I think Elijah is next. And Elijah, thank you for being featured in the report. And Earle, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Chris.
Yep. Yeah, Elijah, I can just jump in for 1 second just to mention that, well, Elijah, are you there?
Oh, yep, I'm here. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So just introducing Elijah, he's an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife in the Cannabis and In-Stream Flow Unit within the Fisheries Branch in Sacramento. He holds a BS in Fisheries Biology from Humboldt State University and an MS in Watershed Science from Utah State University. He has over 15 years experience working with aquatic habitat throughout the West, including Northern California. His professional and academic background is within the intersection of geomorphology, hydrology, and aquatic ecology, and he worked in the academic, nonprofit, and private restoration sectors before joining CFW in 2018. He is the in-stream flow coordinator for the Fisheries Branch and is helping to develop a statewide monitoring program, the California Environmental Monitoring and Assessment Program, otherwise known as CMAP. CMAP is intended to assess the effects of land use, including cannabis, and environmental drivers to inform CDFW's cannabis program. Elijah also grew up in rural Humboldt County, which I was not aware of until just now. So that's pretty cool. There we go. Okay, take it away, Elijah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, and thanks everyone from the Cannabis Research Center for inviting me to participate today. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm just gonna real briefly go through some slides here. Let's see, somebody could let me know when you guys can see this. That'd be great.
We can see it. If you can make
great.
Green, that'd be
Okay,
great.
so yeah, so let me just move forward here. So basically, the department's role in being involved in the regulation of cannabis comes from the passage of Senate Bill 94, which specifically calls out the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Fish and Wildlife that we're tasked with determining if either entity, us or the Water Board, finds based on substantial evidence that cannabis cultivation is causing significant adverse impacts on the environment anywhere within the state, then we wouldn't issue new licenses or increase the total number of plants in that area until we were able to determine that we had been able to remediate that impact. In terms of kind of how we in the department view some of the issues around water use and cannabis is that we wanted to start by recognizing similar to what Derrick was saying, but he had some nice data to show this, but we recognize that the total cannabis water footprint in the state is extremely low relative to many other common agricultural crops, and that really, as we all know, due to the history of the illegality of the cannabis cultivation industry in the state, that it's really the location of some of these primarily legacy cannabis cultivation areas that can be problematic because of their setting in these oftentimes naturally intermittent stream headwater settings that are remote and forested and oftentimes in close proximity to listed species or sensitive habitat. Another thing that isn't unique to cannabis but can be an issue in some of these legacy settings is that, and really anywhere within the state, is the timing of cannabis water demand and this is relatively, I think, specific to outdoor and greenhouse crops. This isn't as much of an issue with indoor crops, but that the timing of just plant demand relative to surface flow availability is not great. That the highest demand is when flow availability is lowest. The department is also concerned about the potential for cumulative effects to in-stream flow from many diverters, both licensed and unlicensed. And the data suggests, and a lot of Chris's work really with Ed and others at the CRC really show that that there are a variety of different types of water usage patterns associated with these different types of cultivators. And so, we're trying to get a better handle on distinguishing between the different sort of demographics of the cannabis industry and focusing on the future sort of trends in water usage among these different types of farms that we're seeing emerge on the landscape. Again, sort of echoing some of the stuff that Chris was saying, we're concerned about the potential for stream flow depletion or surface water depletion from well use for cannabis. And as we just learned, from Chris and some of his work, is that the majority of cultivators in Northern California are meeting their water demand through well use, which may in some ways be sort of an unintended consequence of the policy, is that in a lot of ways it's actually easier for folks to get licensed to meet their water needs through well use as opposed to surface diversion. So more people are doing that, and there's other reasons for that as well. But we currently in the Water Board as well have a real lack of any sort of empirical on the ground data investigating that relationship in particular places within the state. So that's something that's concerning us. And just in general, the department really encourages cultivators to try to invest in water storage, to get a good handle on what their water needs are, invest in the storage to meet those needs, and fill that storage in the wet winter months. This is not unique to Northern California, but particularly relevant there. And just in general, to try to implement the best management practices around water use as possible, to really try to lower that general rate of around 10% that Derrick mentioned, that in terms of the ability to increase efficiency and use less water. We also recognize that a lot of those BMPs just aren't out there yet, and so we're really happy that entities like the CRC are helping to develop those BMPs, and we encourage folks to use them. So in order to sort of meet the mandates of SB 94, the department has developed a fairly large-scale cannabis program. So we have over 100 staff scattered throughout the state, with folks in the ranches in the Sacramento area, as well as out in the regions. We have almost half of our staff is in the law enforcement division, but we have a permitting program, people that work directly with cultivators, an enforcement division, an outreach program that hosts permitting workshops to try to help folks through the permitting process. We have a restoration and remediation program that actually the public solicitation for that grant program, I believe, ends today. If anybody is wanting to apply for that, but that's intended to fund a variety of watershed enhancement and restoration and remediation actions associated with typically illegal cannabis production on public land. And then we have a monitoring program, as Chris mentioned. That's what I'm a part of, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that specifically. So again, we're the California Environmental Monitoring and Assessment Program, or CMAP. We got started in 2018, so we're only 3 years into this, and we have dedicated funding through the taxation of cannabis, and also that mandate that I mentioned through SB 94. And so we're really asking some broad questions about how are the following parameters potentially influenced by land use, including cannabis cultivation and other ecological drivers. So we're assessing aquatic, riparian, and terrestrial habitats, looking at community composition and structure of regionally relevant species, variety of species throughout the state. And where possible, we're going to be establishing in-stream flow thresholds, and then monitoring other water quality parameters like dissolved oxygen, flow, and temperature. Generally, too, we're trying to be able to assess the cumulative effects or potential impacts from all these different land uses and ecological drivers. And additionally, this data will support a variety of actions and within the department. So we're providing data that could help meet the objectives of the State Wildlife Action Plan, as well as data that could just be used generally to help inform drought and wildfire response. I also wanted to mention that we have a project underway right now with Chris and Ted and other folks with the CRC, where we have contracted with them to continue working on a series of cannabis water demand models that Chris and Ted primarily developed, and we used an earlier version of one of these models, and this work is described in one of Chris and Ted's papers. And anyway, so yeah, we found that first version of the model to be really useful for helping to predict the amount of water extracted for cannabis based on operation type, size, the amount of storage at a particular farm. And then, based on basically self-reported data from cannabis cultivators, you can, basically give it this information about those things related to the cultivation site itself, and then the model can estimate what the amount of water would be that would be extracted for cannabis to meet the demands of that particular farm at a monthly time step. And so we're working with them to continue that project, to make it applicable over more of the state, and also to try to develop some specific models to elicit cannabis production. We know, and Derrick was mentioning too, that there's a wide variety of water use patterns associated with these different demographics within the cannabis industry. So we're really interested in trying to do a better job of capturing what the illicit sort of water footprint is relative to other types of cultivation. And I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Elijah. Really great to hear from you. Before I move on to Earle, I just want to make a quick announcement. I think it was made in the chat, but if you guys have any questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom that we'd encourage you to use to submit questions, which we'll address after we hear from Earle. So Earle Crosby has been with the Karuk Department of Natural Resources since June 2001, and is currently the Deputy Director of the Watersheds branch. His work with the Karuk tribe has encompassed watershed restoration projects and initiatives throughout the Aboriginal territory. Earle, it's all yours.
All right. Well, IUT, everybody out there in webinar land. As you say before, my name is Earle Crosby. I'm the Director of the Watersheds branch for the Karuk Tribe's Department of Natural Resources. I want to thank CDC for having us here today. I'm here to, let you know first is where we are, where the Karuk tribe is. We are located in the far northwestern portion of California. Heck, I got almost spitting. We're between I-5 and Highway 101, east of Shasta. Our territory encompasses 1.3 million acres on the Klamath River, in the Klamath River Basin. 9% of it is currently occupied by the Forest Service, Six Rivers National Forest and the Klamath National Forest. We also take in portions of Humboldt County, Siskiyou County, and Dor Norte. The people have been here for, since time began, as we spoke of earlier. And in terms of, the cannabis production, we're looking at and concerned with, both the legal aspect of cannabis farming and also the illegal aspect of cannabis farming, both, on private land and out there on the occupied territories with the trespass roads, as they're called. Our two main concerns are water quality and water quantity. Since we are and have been for many, many years, trying to get the dams out, trying to deal with some of the other issues of water quality and quantity or in the Klamath. Water is a part of the tribal people's lives here. The water supports our fisheries, and the fisheries are very important subsistence type of food resources that are utilized. Also, a lot of the plants are used for basket weaving. Weaving is putting those plants into your mouth. So for water quality, to address these issues, we have been, using passive samplers that, that are deployed for 28 days in given creeks or given watersheds to try to get a handle on what's in that water. Because as being a rural community, a lot of the water that, either, tribal and non-tribal communities and people use are springs and creeks. It's non-treated water, except for we have a small treatment facility here in town. So once we were understanding that there's, a lot of illegal trespass grows out there, and there's, a certain amount of, of legal and quasi-legal cannabis farms in the hillsides on the private properties, we were kind of concerned of, what's actually in the water and what would be coming off of those known and unknown sites. So as part of this passive sampling regime that we've taken up, we're able to detect, insecticides, pesticide compounds, and also pharmaceutical compounds that were detected through a soil sampling below known cannabis cultivation sites. So this was concerning us because in some of these watersheds that we tested, there's no private property on them. They're out in the middle of nowhere. So we're finding these compounds, and that's giving us a bit of concern. They're not rising to the level of human health concerns, but there's one in Red Cap Creek, some pesticide, because it's rising to the level of, it could be affecting the food chain. Amphibs may be getting, or can be infected by this, or be affected by this pesticide that we're finding in the creeks. We're continuing to monitor these same creeks. I think at the 5th run, we're trying to do another one this summer during low flow to see if we can, ascertain, where these illicit farms may be up in the hills. And for the water quantity, I have to agree with some of the folks earlier that yes, maybe cannabis on the whole is doesn't use a lot of water, the cannabis farming, as opposed to like alfalfa farming in the Scott Valley. I mean, that uses an ungodly amount of water, or actually ranching for cattle in the Shasta, uses an ungodly amount of water. But we're finding a more localized effect of this usage, especially down in Yurok land. I don't mean to speak for the Yurok people; it's a different tribe. But a few years ago, they were having issues where folks that weren't living on the reservation were utilizing the upstream sources of water for their cannabis farms, and they're actually drying up these small creeks, these seasonal creeks that other people rely on below them for water. So the tribe had to truck water into folks to ensure that had enough drinking water to last through this prolonged drought that we're dealing with. So that's the quantity, issue there. Is it's more localized, and we're trying to get a handle on it as well. The Yuroks have been very proactive in trying to contact landowners and let them know about their water usage, and try to encourage them to quit these practices that aren't efficient use of water. That we're concerned about. One more thing I would have to add is some of these illegal trespass grows. There's a concern of we don't know where they are out in the landscape. Not just having an effect on water quality through the use of herbicides and pesticides and indiscriminate use of them. Label says there's also a concern of our tribal people being stumbling, and our employees of stumbling upon these illegal grows that are out there in the woods, because the Forest Service law enforcement agencies will not let us know where these are, where these potentially may be. So, I mean, just the other day, our wildlife crew stumbled across one that was active last year, and it looks like it'll more than likely be active this year. So that's another one of our concerns is, people out there, Karuk people being Karuk people on the landscape, could run across these gardens that may not be occupied by people who are willing to do violence. So that's another concern of ours that we're trying to address. It's being addressed slowly but surely, and we're hoping in the future there will be a better cooperation with U.S. Forest Service law enforcement to be able to we can assist each other to make these woods safer for not just tribal people but non-tribal people as well. I look forward to any questions in the answer period. Thank you.
Thanks, Earl. I guess while we give people a chance to submit some questions, let me turn my video on as well. I'll just keep it with you for a second. So you'd mentioned water quality, which is a topic that a lot of us, other members of this panel, haven't really been involved with as much. I was wondering if you could just talk for a second about some of the challenges you've faced, excuse me, faced trying to do water quality sampling for cannabis and compounds related to cannabis cultivation.
Yeah, some of the problems we've been facing is we're scattered for there's folks all up and down our river, so we're just trying to ascertain what are the best creeks to be able to test from. Also having access to these testing sites that are relatively easier for us to get to. Because sometimes, like we were talking about earlier, was like Dillon Creek is one of the places that we were testing from. It's just the access is problematic, and then if we're out there during the high flow, then you're putting people in a position where they can get seriously injured, try to get down to where these samplers are being deployed, and we have to make sure that the samplers don't get washed away. And also, we have an issue with in some of the hydrograph is when the climate drops really low. We are trying to put samplers at the mouths of creeks, and when the climate drops so low, and then the mouth drops, and then your sampler is stuck high and dry. So you only get, instead of a 30-day or a 28-day window of sampling, you only get maybe 15 before it comes out of the water. So just being able to find the right spot is problematic.
Yeah, I could imagine. It looks like we have a question here. Yeah,
well, I just had a really quick question related to what you were just saying, Earl. Are you guys trying to hone in on the timing of when you're deploying these? Like, are you trying to get them out, to try to capture kind of that first fall flush, or are you just getting them out kind of whenever you can throughout the growing season?
No, we're trying to, we targeted it. The first one we did through the whole water year for a couple of years is mainly trying to get that first flush, and also trying to get a little bit of high water, and also trying to throw our samplers out there and catch that low flow. So you have different flow patterns to be able to ascertain, when is it and how much we may be getting in the creeks, time to detect it, because we're going to try to use our samplers to try to hone in on where these grows may be, just trying to deploy them, up the creek or up into the watershed, and try to be able to just hone in on where they may be, what tributary they may be, utilizing the grow site.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd like to get to some of the questions. The first one I see here, I think Derrick is in the process of responding to, but it's one for you, Derrick. Are there any new technologies that might increase water efficiency in the future? It seems like that's a one to.
I can be live instead of typing. So yeah, in general, in an indoor and a greenhouse setting, the big challenge is that nobody really knows how to establish the right environmental conditions in these spaces that have, again, a lot of interactive effects going on between the heat from the lights, the cooling from the HVAC systems, the dehumidification that's going on, and basically every cultivator is doing something different, and they're often defining the environmental conditions they want within like a 10-degree swing. And so what you're having is HVAC manufacturers size to the most extreme setting that the cultivator is telling them, which is way bigger capacity than is needed. And so you have all these systems fighting each other, basically. The best approach, given all of that variability, is just to increase automation and controls, and that we're very focused on that right now. And we're going to have a controls best practices guide come out. It's currently, in a working group format, and will be peer reviewed and then published roughly June. So look for that. Again, that's indoor and greenhouse. Greenhouses are in particular really challenging because, you know, the sunlight's changing throughout the day, and that's just changing the internal conditions. In an outdoor setting, you know, there can be a lot. You know, water pumps is a significant opportunity, just efficiency in the water pump technologies. I'm happy to have anyone else answer any questions as well.
I just had a quick follow-up to that. Have you seen much difference between innovation in water use efficiency and the other energy use efficiency metrics? Because you guys are doing other more like lighting and HVAC related stuff. Has there been any sort of divergence in which is making strides faster?
That's a good, I would say nobody's making strides really fast. I think the use of LED lighting is critical, and it helps all across the board. So if you can reduce the light from the heat, and that enables you to have less cooling going on, and that's generally accepted. And cultivators have generally agreed that LEDs are the future, but there is still the legacy farming community is against LEDs for a variety of reasons. They just culturally don't believe they work. The reality is we know they do, but there's a tremendous amount of training that's needed. And so we are very much encouraging governments and utilities to invest in training. That's a significant missing piece. So yeah, a long way to go in all across the board.
I can imagine. Yeah, with an industry as young as this, that's not hard to believe. I wanted to get back to Elijah, because it seems like a couple people have a question regarding whether or not the state currently has any programs to work with tribes on water issues, because it sounds like there's some common interest here.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I should preface what I'm about to say by saying that, you know, my position within the overall cannabis program, the department, is really specific to monitoring. And so, you know, I'd be happy to point folks in the direction of more knowledgeable staff if there is something really specific related to permitting or outreach or something like that folks have questions about. Our restoration grant program, tribal entities can be an applicant to that. It is a competitive grant program, but that's available to folks. I mean, I think there's generally, you know, again, since we're still kind of in the early days of cannabis regulation and, you know, just figuring out basic stuff about, you know, the potential for cannabis impacts on the landscape. You know, CMAP has really put a lot of energy into reaching out to other entities to try to understand, you know, what they're doing. And, you know, we really are trying to not reinvent the wheel. So I think we could do a better job reaching out to the Karuk tribe and the Yurok tribe to get a better understanding of what exactly you guys are doing, and, you know, how we might support that or learn from that. You know, one thing I was really curious about is you know, getting more information from Earle about, you know, the specific type of sampler they're using. That's, you know, something that we have looked into as well. And, you know, I can follow up with you, Earle, after that. But just in general, you know, we're trying to be as collaborative as possible and have a really front-facing monitoring program that gets our data out and available to other entities as quickly as possible. But, you know, we're not quite there yet, so we're still in the development phases. But, you know, from a permitting perspective, I really am not, I don't know how much interaction there's been between our permitting staff and folks in Northern California tribes. You know, again, we're a large program and we have a lot of regional staff that are operating more on the ground with cultivators. And I imagine there's been some level of interaction or reaching out on the part of some of the our regional staff with tribes, but I don't know exactly. So we're definitely open to more collaboration. I'll leave it at that. There's been some level of interaction or reaching out on the part of some of the our regional staff with tribes, but I don't know exactly. So we're definitely open to more collaboration. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of the specifics about which samplers you're using and which pesticides you're monitoring for, this is
We're actually, you know, we're working with USGS, and I noticed Annette had a question. I could email Annette the whole report. But we're mainly finding insecticides and, you know, and herbicides and even some fungicides, you know, Thorion. We're also finding deltamethrin, durion, phenylpyrethrin, verpanol, which is stuff you put on your dogs, you know, like, oh my God, for fleas and ticks. We found that on Dillon Creek, middle of nowhere. It's weird, in high water too. How to get in there if you got me. We're also finding estrone, and methoxyfezide or fezide and metocolar. And we're also, what's really bizarre is we're finding a derivative of DDT that's persistent in the landscape around here. And you know, talking to USGS, it was finding a lot of that, you know, the breakdown component of DDT, you know, all over California. So it wasn't anything new to them, but it was new to us. We're like, whoa, really? You haven't used DDT around here since the 50s. So it's pretty persistent. No, we're using EST labs, the samplers, the passive samplers, the SPMDs, and us. We're like, whoa, really? You haven't used DDT around here since the 50s. So it's pretty persistent. And then go back to the other question, we use our and I can get that information out. I think it's, you know, it's pretty low, at least for Karuk. You know, we're bigger, you know, bigger fish to fry. It's kind of a weird thing to say. But yeah, we have, you know, the climate dams we're trying to have issues with. That's really, you know, hammering our fisheries. The climate dams are coming out. We're getting closer and closer to being that done. The largest dam removal in history in the United States. We also have, you know, just traditional agriculture in the Shasta Valley, which is, you know, utilizing a lot of water to maintain those agricultural practices that are a bigger environmental impact on the Karuk tribe. But it's still an issue. I mean, we have a obligation to 1.3 million acres to take care of it, and very seriously. So anything that's harming, you know, the relations, which are the fish and the plants and the rocks, we take very seriously, no matter how insignificant or maybe insignificant. We still have to take a look at it. So utilizing a lot of water to maintain those agricultural practices that are a bigger environmental impact on the Karuk tribe. But it's still an issue. I mean, we have a obligation to 1.3 million acres to take care of it, and very seriously. So anything that's harming, you know, the relations, which are the fish and the plants and the rocks, we take very seriously, no matter how. There's no private property, so we can only, you know, assume that they're coming from illegal cannabis cultivation up in the headwaters of those. And for some of the creeks that are, you know, that are below actual settlements, there could be there's a mixture of cannabis cultivation on those parcels and just normal people just living, you know. So it could be,
that makes sense.
It could be coming from the cannabis. It could be coming from their you know, their garden. It could be coming from, you know, how they use herbicides and pesticides on their houses. But I'm thinking people put fungicides on their tomatoes, but you never know. We were actually stumbled across one on 5 Mile Creek, which is just up the road from me. It was accidentally stumbled upon just by somebody looking at Google Earth, and all of a sudden said, "Whoa, take a look at that." We took a closer look, and it's like, "Oh yeah, you know, squares aren't natural out in the woods, and you don't see plants planted in rows out in the middle of nowhere." It could be coming from, you know, how they use herbicides and pesticides on their houses, but I'm thinking people put fungicides on their tomatoes, but you never know.
Well, and Earle, since you mentioned earlier that on Google Earth, you can see when land is being cleared, and that was one of the indicators that you were using as that being a cannabis farm.
Yes, we were actually stumbled across one on 5 Mile Creek, which is just up the road from me. It was accidentally stumbled upon just by somebody looking at Google Earth, and all of a sudden say, whoa, take a look at that.
You know, some of the challenges around regulating cannabis water use have already been kind of articulated. You know, one of the fundamental ones is what, you know, Derrick was talking about quite a bit, is just lack of basic information about what water is required for different types of growing. And, you know, so that makes it harder. It also makes it harder to regulate cannabis water use in the way that the state is managing groundwater and surface water in sort of different pots. You know, that's changing, as we all know, with SGMA. And, you know, I think there's more awareness around the potential for stream flow depletion maybe within the state than there was maybe a decade ago. But that is hard because we don't have any real data showing how connected wells are to surface water in a lot of places. Some of the other challenges is that just, you know, the water rights process within the state is really hard to navigate for anyone. And it takes a long time to get water rights registered. So, you know, the regulatory process itself makes it a little bit cumbersome to try to have a unified way of dealing with water management. You know, there's a lot of different agencies that have, in some ways, kind of overlapping jurisdictions around some of this stuff. And it's not always clear exactly who should be doing what to meet our mandates through Senate Bill 94. The sort of early phases of where we're at in developing these programs is tough. You know, the law passed, and then basically state agencies scrambled to hire as many new folks as they could to try to develop these programs that were really already needed. You know, we knew that the cannabis industry pre-legalization had effectively more than doubled in size in Northern California. In the periods leading up to legalization, you know, and that was actually some of Van's work that really highlighted that. So, you know, just dealing with the history of the industry is hard. It's one thing if, you know, some cultivator is starting a new farm in some existing agricultural watershed in, say, you know, the Central Coast somewhere where it's flat and the forest was cleared decades ago, and, you know, they've been growing some other crop there. So it's a lot easier to get that person permitted and cultivating rather than somebody who, you know, started their farm in the 70s when they were trying to hide out from law enforcement, you know. And so basically just that history of illegality makes it harder to try to help folks like that are really trying to come into compliance and minimize their impacts and want to do the things right. You know, in a lot of cases, there just isn't much water available to them in those settings. That's just the hard reality of where we live in the state. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I mean, what we tell jurisdictions at, you know, at every level is the more you can make efficient your regulated producers, the more they can outcompete the illicit market and absorb the compliance burdens and whatnot. And that message, like, I'm selling that very effectively here in the legislature in Oregon. It's bipartisan, it's bicameral. Everybody gets it. They know that long term, to have the tax proceeds rolling back into communities, we're going to need to strengthen the regulated market. The way we get there is through data, and like we started the conversation, we need more data, and so we very much encourage jurisdictions to either require. I would recommend require, and the state's got a reporting requirement, you know, in sight for 2023, or at least encourage reporting and benchmarking. And we're in conversation with Supervisors Williams and Hashik in Mendocino County, and Kristen Nevedal, the cannabis coordinator in the county, and also Ventura County, and then 3C Ren down there. And we're available as a resource. You know, we are a nonprofit. We are objective. We don't sell any producers' data. We don't release any data about a producer. We just take in data, help the producers, and then share the aggregate data so that jurisdictions know what's going on. And ultimately, as we grow the data set, and we're seeing this in Massachusetts, where we are specified as the platform to help the producers there, that the more data we have, the more we can help these growers. And when they are providing their data and they actually can understand how to standardize it and how they're comparing in terms of performance relative to other facilities, then the light bulb goes on, and then they're activated and they understand how to move forward. But in the absence of that requirement to benchmark and report, they either think they're doing a great job, or they just don't care. They're not getting the pressure. Pressure's coming from investors and others, but the jurisdictions have a really important role to make on, again, reporting or benchmarking, and then training. Know what's going on, and ultimately, as we grow the data set, and we're seeing this in Massachusetts, where we are specified as the platform to help the producers there, that the more data we have, the more we can help these growers. And when they are providing their data and they actually can understand how to standardize it and how they're comparing in terms of performance relative to other facilities, then the light bulb goes on, and then they're activated and they understand how to move forward. But in the absence of that requirement to benchmark and report, they either think they're doing a great job, or they just don't care. They're not getting the pressure. Pressure's coming from investors and others, but the jurisdictions have a really important role to make on, again, reporting or benchmarking, and then training.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, thanks, Derrick, and thanks everybody else, Elijah, Earle. And to those of you who have questions but didn't have a chance to get them answered, if you want to reach out to us, we can put you in contact with our panel members. Otherwise, it looks like we're over time. So thank you again to everybody for joining us, and thank you to the panel members. And we'll hopefully see you at the next webinar next month.